Okay, good evening. We're getting into that really fun part of Revelation. And as we discussed last week when we were in Revelation 20, we talked about how in these first few verses, specifically in verses 1 through 6, we finally have this moment where we see Satan has been bound for a time frame of 1,000 years. And from what we know, that 1,000 years is this complete amount of time where some sort of power has been taken away from Satan. My understanding is that this power that's been taken away from him is his ability to be able to use other nations, empires, to cause havoc, persecution upon God's people. And so, just like he was using the beast, as we talked about, the Roman Empire, he used the beast and was able to do some things, give the beast some powers to be able to perform signs and wonders, to torment these particular Christians, to wear them out, as Daniel will put that in Daniel chapter 7. And so he's been bound for this 1,000 years, and I believe that's where we find ourselves today. Is we are in that 1,000-year reign that's happening right now, and this reign that Jesus is having is through the church. He is seated at the right hand of God. God is making his enemies his footstool, and we are the church. We are reigning as his bride on the earth right now. And that brings us into verse 7, when we have this moment where John says, when the 1,000 years are completed. Okay? So when that complete amount of time happens. Now, if you've tracked throughout the rest of the New Testament, you will know, especially in Matthew 25, the very ending of Matthew 24 into Matthew 25, we don't know when this 1,000 years is ending, right? Jesus is going to come like a thief in the night. We don't know the hour or the time when he will come back. We just know he will come back. And throughout Matthew 25, you have these different parables that are used to help these people understand they need to be ready, and we need to be ready for this 1,000 years to be completed. So when this 1,000 years is completed, Satan will be released from his prison, verse 8, and he will come out to deceive the nations which are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for war. The number of them is like the sand of the sea. Okay, so now we have this moment. All of a sudden, Satan is unbound, okay? And he goes out to these nations. You'll find these nations mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. And these nations are used to torment God's people. And it almost seems that he's being released again, and he's going to have this one last shot to try and take down God's people. And it almost seems as though he's going to have, if we understand it, how he used Rome, and also we understand Ezekiel 38 and 39, we have this moment where he's going to try and have another nation or empire rise up and gather them against God's people one more time. And notice verse 9, and they came up on the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city, and fire came down from heaven and devoured them. Please take heart for verse 9, because we notice that Satan has been loosed from these chains. He's going and he's trying to surmount this last hurrah, this last attack on God's people, and as he's about to come down and cause devastation on God's saints, he's taken care of. He's devoured, right? And it seems though it happens instantaneously, pretty quickly, and we find that in verse 10, and then the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and he and they, all of them, will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Okay? Now, this may help you also. I don't know, we've talked about it a little bit. There's a theory of annihilationism, or actually a teaching of annihilation, annihilationism, which is that you cease to exist in this particular idea where when the final judgment happens, those who go into heaven get to dwell with God forever. Those who are going to hell just cease to exist. There's no eternal punishment. Now, from what I read here and I read through in other verses, I notice that this torment is going to happen forever and ever. Okay? Sometimes we can really make the Bible harder than what it really is. And so notice here, the readers here are assured that those who are willing to give up their lives to maintain their faith, they will be rewarded in the end. And that is, again, talked about here. If you can stay faithful, and I don't know, when this 1,000 years is completed, which some people will say, last week we talked about premillennialism and amillennialism, right? We're either in the premillennial, pre-1,000 years, which I don't believe premillennialism, or we're amillennialism, which we are living in the 1,000-year reign right now. There's also a group that believes in postmillennialism, which is we are living in this time where Satan has been loosed, and he is going about trying to surmount this one final hoorah battle, and he's trying to rise nations up and this empire up to take out God's people. I don't know. I would like to say we live during the 1,000-year reign right now, but I wouldn't have a lot of heartburn if someone said we live during this time as well. So we have this happening, but ultimately, please take note that the devil will be defeated and he will be thrown into the lake of fire. Okay? Now, this is an interesting quote from the martyrdom of Polycarp. He was a follower of Christ in the 2nd century, as you can tell, and he was martyred under the persecution of the Roman Empire. Notice what he says here, and this was recorded from his words as he was about to be killed. You threaten me with fire that burns for a time and is quickly quenched. For you do not know the fire that awaits the wicked in the judgment to come and in everlasting punishment. But why are you waiting? Come, do what you will. That is a guy who knew what Revelation 20, verses 7 through 10 was talking about. He understood that you guys can kill me now by burning me, by setting me on fire in front of everybody else, making a spectacle of me, persecuting me because of my faith, because I won't bow the knee to your emperor. But I understand that this fire that you may put on me now is just temporary. And I don't want to be a part of this fire that is eternal, the fire that is there forever, okay? Next, you go on to read in Revelation 20, verses 11 through 13. This is what some people will say the third section to this particular vision, because you have another moment where he says, "Then I saw a great white throne and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and books were opened, and another book was opened." I was reading through some notes, and I found it interesting, especially since we've been going through the book of James. And in James chapter 2, the very beginning, we're talking about how we don't need to show favoritism or partiality. God is not showing partiality. Notice who all is going to be standing before God, both great and small, right? Those who are rich, those who are poor, those who have lived a great life, those who have lived a hard life, those who come from that background, those who come from this background. Everyone will be standing before God, both great and small. And then there will be books opened. And then there will be another book opened, which is the book of life. Okay? And the dead were judged from the things which were written in the books. Now, those who have lived a righteous life have lived a faithful life to God, displaying their faith through the works that they are performing every day because they love God and they want to follow Him. They will have those deeds recorded in these books. And there will be that moment, and it's kind of interesting, does time exist at this time? Because that's a lot of people to start recounting a lot of the things that were done in their lives. But those deeds will be brought up. And those who aren't followers of Christ, those who aren't living how God wanted them to live, those will be brought up as well. And so you have this moment where all of these things that are recorded will be brought about, and you will be judged by those deeds. And then verse 13, and then the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, every single one of them according to their deeds. Okay, so we will all be judged by our deeds. Doesn't matter who we are, where we came from, we are all judged by what we do on this earth. Then verses 14 and 15, death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Now, this is going to be a stark contrast to what he's going to talk about in the next chapter. Because he's talking about those who are not in the book of life. They're thrown into this lake of fire, the fire that we learned from verse 10 that burns forever and ever, right? As opposed to what we read at the beginning of Revelation chapter 21, okay? Now, to summarize this chapter 20 depicts the time from the resurrection of Christ to the final judgment. Satan is bound, that his power is limited by the victory of Christ over sin and death. And during the same time that Satan is bound, those who give their lives to remain faithful simply live and reign with Christ. And at the end of this period, that 1,000 years of time, Satan is released to be defeated and cast into the lake of fire. And at this time, all of the dead are raised, judged, and their destinies are sealed. That brings us into Revelation 21, okay? A phenomenal chapter, especially these first 8 verses. I'm sure you've read them before. You may have even memorized them. So he goes into this moment of this vision. Then I saw a new heaven and new earth. Now that phraseology is taken from Isaiah chapter 65, verses 17 through 25. For the first heaven and the first earth have passed away. If you go to 2 Peter chapter 3, you'll learn maybe how that passing away of the current heaven and earth is going to happen through a dissolving or a burning up of the elements, okay? So the first heaven and the first earth have passed away, and there is no longer any sea. And then I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, that's how the Hebrews writer also calls it, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. Now, if you notice, I have John 14, verses 1 and 2, above that idea of made ready. This is pretty cool. If you're familiar with John 14, verses 1 and 2, that's where Jesus looks at his disciples and says, I go to a place go prepare a place for you. Now, that idea of I'm going to prepare a place for you is I'm going to make ready a place for you. The same word is used there, and it almost seems as though this is that time where Jesus says, hey, all things are ready, right? And now this new Jerusalem is coming down to the new heaven and new earth, okay? Please imagine that, what you want to imagine that. I don't want to debate about that. In verse 3, he says, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people. Now, I thought this is pretty interesting. In Jewish history, and a lot of their tradition, they understood and I think I even have it written down here. Yeah, the Jewish eschatological, which is the end of time studies, their concept was that the new earth would be a place like the Garden of Eden, where only the righteous would live. And there is some writings from the intertestamental period where this tradition would come from with them. Tobit, chapter 14, verses 5 through 7, that's in the Apocrypha writings. You also see some writings from the Pseudepigrapha, all talking about this new heaven and new earth, almost as if it is another Garden of Eden that has come down, that God has prepared, where all righteousness will dwell. and that we will also have the ability to dwell with God during that time as well. And so as you go through this, notice, behold, the tabernacle of God is among men. The dwelling place of God is now among men. He will dwell among them. They shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. Now, I want you to imagine with me, at the very end of chapter 20, in the very beginning of chapter 21, we have two different places. We've got a lake that burns forever, where you've got the beast, the false prophet, and Satan. Or you've got this new heaven and new earth, this new Jerusalem, this holy city, God's tabernacle. Which place do you want to dwell forever and ever? That's what John's trying to get at here. There's these two different places, okay? What they're going to look like, I don't know. I just know I don't want to be in the place that burns forever and ever. I want to be with God, amongst him, dwelling with him, with all of those who have lived a righteous life, that have made sure to keep themselves from the beast and being marked by him. Verse 4 is a wonderful, wonderful verse. Notice, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning, nor crying, or pain. The first things have passed away. I was listening to a great podcast this week talking about death, actually. And it's interesting because sometimes we have really belittled death. And I've even done that in my own preaching and teaching, to where we kind of shove it aside and we don't want people to think about it because, hey, they died, but you know what? Guess what? We're all going to be alive again one day. But notice, people that will be in heaven, people that will get to dwell with God, they're crying. And sometimes as guys, we put on this persona of real men don't cry. Well, I want to have the opportunity for God to wipe away my tears. And so there could be times, and especially when people die in our lives, where we need to spend time grieving them. We need to spend time crying about them, because in the end, ultimately, we will have a God who's dwelling with us, who will wipe away any tears that we may have. And there will be no more death. Death is a horrible thing. And one of the main things they kept saying over and over in this podcast was, we need to be people who absolutely, without a doubt, hate death. We hate it so much. We don't cast it aside as saying, well, you know what, who cares, because Christians, we get to live forever. No, we hate death. Think about Jesus with Lazarus. He was torn up because Lazarus, his friend, had died. If Jesus knew, hey, don't worry, I'm going to be with him again, would he have had that same reaction? Okay? And so we'll be thankful that there is no more death. There is no more grieving loved ones who have passed away. There will no longer be any mourning. There will no longer be any crying or pain or illnesses or any of these things, because all that will be done away with and passed away. Now, what's interesting is I like to wonder, will all those things be present in the lake of fire? Will there be constant mourning? Will there be constant tears? Will there be constant crying? We know there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Will there be all of those things? I don't want any part of any of that. And then you have in verse 5, he says, and he who sits on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. And he said, write, for these words are faithful and true. Now, the last couple of verses we'll look at. Then he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of water of life without cost. He who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. Those who overcome. Now, this was a great message for those during John's time that were about to or were currently going through massive persecution from the Roman Empire, but this rings true for us. He who overcomes will inherit the things he talked about in verses 4 and following, and even verse 1 and following, talking about inheriting the new heaven and the new earth, the dwelling place of God, this place where there's no weeping, there's no mourning, there's no tears, there's no crying, there's none of that. That's what you get to inherit if you can overcome this life. If you can overcome Satan during your time on this earth, you will get to inherit those things. Now, the reality is there's a but right after that. A huge contrast. Okay, probably one of the bigger contrasts in Scripture. Those who overcome, they get to inherit the new heaven and new earth. But for the cowardly and unbelieving and abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters, all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death, which burns forever and ever. Now, the very first description he put there, those who are cowardly, that one seems to stick out to me quite heavily. Because you have to think about it in the context of Revelation and how much this would have maybe pricked some of the hearts of those who were reading this message. Because they were having the strong temptation to what? To receive the mark of the beast, to give up, to denounce Christ. You think about Polycarp, as he is about to be set on fire, he said, hey, this fire only burns for a little bit. I don't want the fire that burns forever. You see, there were a lot of people that bowed the knee to the emperor, that were willing to denounce Christ, and I don't know their motives. Maybe it was, I literally don't want to be burned alive. Or maybe it was, I simply want to be able to go into the marketplace and be able to buy food for my family. He says, don't be cowardly. Don't be unbelieving. Don't be an abominable. Don't be a murderer. Don't be an immoral person. Don't be a sorcerer, idolater, or a liar, because you don't want that reward. You don't want that punishment, okay? And so it leaves us with the question, and maybe even something for us to contemplate and meditate on, and be the person that's in verse 7. The one that's going to overcome, the one that's going to conquer this world so that we can inherit those things that he talks about early on in this chapter. Don't be the person who is cowardly. Don't be the person that is untrusting and all those other things, okay? Now, we will cover the rest of chapter 21 next week. I hope this has made sense. Again, do not try to confuse yourself when going through the Bible. Use all the tools at your expense, and it will help you understand what's going on. If you're here this evening and you are in need of responding to the Lord's invitation, we would love for you to make your need known to us. If you're in need of prayers, we'd love to pray with you. Or if you're ready tonight to have your sins washed away in baptism, we would love for that to be tonight as well. We just ask that if you have any need, you come while we stand and sing.